what is the one domain in which we are most likely to make the maximum mistakes, or that one facet of life where we are prone to making the most mistakes despite our knowledge, skill, deftness, sensitivity, awareness, acceptance, etc., etc. I never thought that would be the case, but since from the time I have myself become a parent, I've quickly realized that it is indeed parenting. It came very easy to us to blame our parents and criticize them. And it's only since I have myself assumed that role that I've realized it is a very rewarding but an extremely arduous and challenging task. Um, and as if it didn't already encompass various challenges, what also tends to happen, sometimes unconsciously, unintentionally, unwittingly, inadvertently, is that the neurosis and the fears that individuals have, those who are in the role of parents, tend to either by a process of osmosis pass them on to the children, or those fears manifest in very unpleasant behavior, which the kids are at the receiving end of. And I think that as responsible parents, and we all know that all parents love their children dearly, there is perhaps an opportunity that with that awareness and a certain amount of understanding, that we investigate, identify those fears, patterns, and behaviors, and take certain corrective action. And to discuss this, we are joined by the very insightful Preksha Agnihotri. We are calling this session Birthed by Fear. I'm, of course, very, very grateful to Preksha for making time and joining us, but also for actually even suggesting this theme and topic, which was entirely her idea. And as a parent and an educator, it immediately resonated. I could see my own fears and the way they play out with my daughter, and I immediately jumped at it. So, not only do I want to express my gratitude for her time, but also for being mindful and thoughtful enough to suggest our theme for today. So, Preksha, a very warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
We would love for you to begin, before we dive into the murky waters of parenting, to tell us in your own words a little bit about your work, your practice.
Yeah. So I'm Preksha Agnihotri. I'm a psychotherapist. I mainly work with children, adolescents, and young adults. So I do work with a lot of parents in my practice, and like guiding parents with building connection with their kids, how things are going with them. And apart from that, I also take sessions with the kids in itself. So it is more of a collaborative process. So, working with multiple parents throughout the years, I did realize that a lot of anxiety that young adults also face these days, or expectations that they might have from themselves, or kids in general, expectations that they have from themselves, a lot of them are set by parents. And a lot of those expectations also a lot of times comes from the parents' own life or their own mishappenings or things and experiences that they've been through. So I think this was a topic that resonated with me, and definitely an open discussion about this would create a lot of awareness as to how our patterns as parents might influence those of our kids, and how we can in general, first work on ourselves and eventually improve the quality of life that our children lead.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And thank you for outlining that. My lay person's observation and perspective, although I will say for myself that I'm a reasonably aware and invested parent. And because I'm also an educator interacting routinely with middle and high school children, particularly, I notice this stark irony nowadays that compared to parents of previous generations, my parents, for example, had a very, very different parenting style and ethos.
Yeah.
And now, by and large, I think it might be fair to generalize that newer parents are a lot more intellectually aware, and their knowledge base is a lot higher in terms of certain dynamics and tenets and fundamentals about parenting and relationships, etc. The irony part is that uh, despite that, I think the sheer stress and pressure that new parents and human beings feel in today's contemporary world is significantly more and from numerous sources as compared to our parents. So that almost negates this knowledge or additional knowledge that they have. I would love to know your views on the phenomenon of a heightened pressure that new parents feel.
Yeah, definitely. So, of course, our world has become very fast paced now as compared to, our parents' time or before that for that matter. There's so many resources, so many books, so many articles, so many people actively talking about parenting these days and the right way to do it, the wrong way to do it. This is what you should be doing, or this is what you shouldn't be doing. It does create a lot of pressure on new parents, and it is of course really natural to feel lost in that part, because I think as humans now in general overall we have so much information as to what's right and wrong that we forget that we're actually human at the end of the day, and our experience is what will teach us, right? So as much as you read the books, attend the workshops, do everything that you can under the sun, the experience in real life will be very different. Right. So I think one thing that really helps to have a base, as to raise children that are like confident and outgoing, putting themselves out there, are not afraid of taking like certain risks. I think a lot of it does start with self-reflection as a parent, right? Just taking a pause, taking a moment, slowing yourself down to see and reflect where is it that I am projecting my fear in my life and how that fear might be affecting my child.
I'm going to take the liberty of interrupting you here very quickly because I want to get into that head on in
Yeah.
some detail. But very quickly before that, I completely agree with you. I think what tends to also happen is that, it's one thing to acquire knowledge by reading and exposing oneself to content, but largely that remains theoretical,
Yeah.
and it sort of plays out quite differently when it comes to applying those
Definitely.
principles, because real life is very different. Every
Yeah.
individual is different, every individual parent is different, every individual child is different. I can tell you that, I've straddled these polar opposite universes where perhaps I belong to an era where, in our boarding schools, we were caned, for example, to now at present, my daughter time when she's in grade 2 and 3, where schools are saying, "Oh my God, we're not even going to correct the answer sheet in red pen because that may be scarring." And so sometimes for a parent, it becomes very difficult to navigate and
Yeah.
figure out what to follow. What is the correct way, because there's so much wisdom
Definitely.
out there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. And I think you can take on as many resources that you as you want, but at the end of the day, as you mentioned, every parent and every child is different. So of course, every relationship in your life will look different. So I think it is very important to actually get in your own wisdom, because I do truly believe that at the end of the day, we're all aligned souls and we know what is right or what is wrong in a way that feels good or bad to us, because our emotions are our body's way of connecting with us, right? And at the end of the day, listening to those emotions and that body, those bodily sensations that you have will guide you more than any other book out there because you know your child. You have a connection with your child that no one else has. You have raised that child, you have seen them since they were born, you have fed them, you have clothed them, you have bathed them, you have done all of those things, and that child will mirror all of your emotions.
And additionally, you are, as an individual who happens to be the parent,
Yeah,
yourself, the making of your own cultural conditioning and context. And you know, hopefully you've figured out parts of it that are okay, and parts of it that need changing. And
definitely.
then you can take that sort of information and insight and apply it to your children. Let's then talk about this, absolutely head on, like I said. When I, again, as a layperson, see ki, acha, fine, fears being passed on from parents to children, or fears manifesting in not ideal behavior, it again straddles this entire spectrum from something as relatively small as an irrational fear of pets, dogs, animals, which we can, which a child can inherit from the parent,
Yeah,
moving up the ladder, to much sort of deeper, larger things. So
definitely.
I think it might help for the audience, for you first to sort of articulate what fears, what kinds of fears, and what are these negative ways in which they tend to manifest.
Again, so this looks different for each individual and each person's journey for each child, right? And honestly, at the base level of all of the fears, from the big fears that you were talking about, of putting your child out in the world, creating that sense of safety, all of those things, and something as small as being afraid of certain animals, there is a definite anecdote to all of these fears, which is basically creating safety and trust, right? Like from the smallest fear to the largest fear, the child has to be aware of how they can trust themselves in that situation, how they can trust people around them in that situation, having the wisdom to choose certain people to be around in situations like that, or in life in general, right? And creating that sense of trust in themselves that they will take the right decision for themselves and they will operate from a place of safety, right? So essentially, fear does stem from a lot of lack of trust. And that lack of trust, for example, if you take it, for example, being careful around stray dogs when you're playing out in the park, which you quite often hear parents saying that to their kids when they're younger. And a lot of times this does end up creating a lack of safety and a lack of trust in the child, that, oh, if a dog comes or if an animal comes to attack me, I will not be able to keep myself safe. So it's just a simple change in narrative as to, just in case this situation does arise, how do we keep ourselves safe in the world? What are those safety measures that we can take for ourselves to create that safety and trust within ourselves and our parents?
In and amongst the numerous very, very important things you said, you have pointedly said several times, creating safety or a safe space. There are lots of factors that perhaps, as compared to an earlier, relatively more footloose and fancy free, simpler, safer, more innocent world, have called that into question big time. I mean, the way, for example, we were able to go post school and just saunter off without telling our parents, cycle to the neighbors or to the park. All of this is inconceivable in today's world, unless
Definitely.
you send, like a Z security detail with your child.
Yeah.
Um, that, coupled with the fact that in order to create a safe space, again, my own understanding is that one of the prerequisites for that is acceptance. Um,
Yeah.
a lot of times, parents can harbor various types of fears. For instance, if I'm an individual who is, let's say, homophobic, okay, and so a big fear of mine is, oh my God, mera beta gay nahi nikal jaye. And
Yeah.
then, I get to know that he is so inclined, I will immediately, in my softest response in that situation, completely invalidate him. So then that safety can never be created.
Of course. That is why, to create safety in our kids, the first important step is to create safety in ourselves. Self transformation, very automatically, in your inner world will definitely translate to your outer world, which includes your spouse, your parents, your children, and any other friends you might have, or any relationships that you have. Right. And a very important part of therapy, actually, in general, is that you create a safer inner world for yourself, which very automatically creates a safer world for other people around you as well. Right. What your inner world says is what is reflected into your outer world. Which is why a lot of parents, when they come in and they say, oh, we're scared this will happen to our kid, or our kid is not mature enough to go to school, XYZ, whatever. And that's when I tell the parents that first, let's separate our voice from where it's coming from. For example, is it coming from my own insecurity, my own achievements that I might not have achieved in my life, my own place of rejection that I might have faced when I was younger, when I was stepping out into my school, any bullying I might have faced at school, any such incidents that make me afraid for my child. For example, even children who are neurodivergent or belong to the community, parents do have a lot of these fears that our child is different.
Of course.
And in that situation, our child being different is not actually the problem, or the world around them is. Definitely we can create a more safe space, we can create safer societies. All of those things, I think, are still being worked on in different spaces in different cities and countries, but of course it's going to take a while. But looking at that, what we can create is a safe space, a safe environment at home, where a child can return to and say, oh, this is what happened at school, and they can ask for help.
Preksha, I want to play just devil's advocate here, and because the thing is that Abhi, what we've been immediately discussing, I think you will agree as a therapist that these are not aspects of an individual's life that can be solved or addressed overnight.
Of course.
Essentially, one is saying that that individual should ought to first, pardon my French, sort out his or her own shit. Okay, so but that we all know that's a process. Even if you're willing and keen, it's a process. What about more immediate and relatively, again, sort of smaller things, for lack of better description, which, simplistic as it sounds and obvious as it sounds, I think it's important to underline and underscore. For example, uh, हम हमेशा ये चीजें सुनते हैं, right? That, okay, let's say there's some financial strain going on in the family.
Yeah,
Don't talk about those things in front of your children. That's again a worry that is manifesting, that will make them anxious. So talk a little bit about these things that can be immediately and relatively more easily addressed and done by parents, or they can keep in mind to avoid doing, at least in order
definitely.
to mitigate or lessen
Yeah.
this whole thing.
Yeah, so the first step would be to create awareness within yourself and maybe your partner, if you have one, and have those discussions amongst yourself first. Agree on certain aspects or non negotiables that you would want in a way to raise your child, right? What sort of parenting do you want to follow? What sort of philosophies do you want to follow? What sort of values and ethics would you want your child to learn? And what are those values and ethics for yourself first, right? And as you discuss this, you do realize a lot of things in that process about yourself and your partner, where you have common ground, where you don't. And navigating those conversations within yourself first is already you having the first step and the first experience to navigating those conversations with your kids. or navigating those conversations with yourself is already your first insight into how would it be better for you to explain it to your child. For example, the financial crunch situation that you spoke about, very natural, very normal, happens in most families at some given point in time. When your child becomes independent, will probably happen in their life as well, right? Which is where, of course, it is something that's worrisome. It is something that might scare your child. It is something that you're also scared about. But instead of making that conversation a conflict or a fear, we can turn it into connection. It's a moment for us to make our kids realize that we're also human and life goes on. This is a process of life, it's a part of life. Yes, it's scary, but if we're all together, we collaborate together, we budget things, we
Huh,
plan
but
things
you
out.
know what? You're absolutely heading towards my central question here, because this wouldn't it be fair to say that this, depending on how one responds and treats this situation,
Yeah,
can straddle either becoming a stressor for the child, or in fact becoming a teachable moment
exactly.
where you are conveying resilience, etc., etc.
Definitely, yes. So any situation that arises can either be a form of connection or it can either be a form of conflict. And that decision actually solely lies on your response as a parent, because your child is still in the learning process and they observe you, they model your behavior and they learn, right? So having those conversations within yourself first is definitely the first step. Having self awareness, the second step. Regulating your emotions first is the first step, because if we don't know how to regulate our emotions, when our child brings up these emotions, they will overwhelm us because we never learned how to regulate ours. So, how do we teach that child that fear, worry, anxiety are all emotions everybody feels at a certain level, because they are protective emotions and they are biologically wired into us for us to feel, right? And they do keep us protected. So, how do we listen to them and communicate with ourselves to regulate those emotions and still arrive at a consensus that works for us?
And
That is where
sorry,
repair
sorry.
and connection, yeah, that is where repair and connection happens.
And again, very silly, naive question, but I think it's important to ask these questions and get an expert's
Definitely.
opinion. Uh, these are conversations and dialogues with the self, with one's partner, significant other, that ought to be had sort of preemptively before the child is born, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that's very important to flag here. A lot of times we only start thinking of things when the situation presents itself, and perhaps it's a little late then.
It necessarily doesn't have to be late, right? Because everyone's experience and journey to life is different. You have different levels of awareness at different points in your life. Sometimes these conversations are something that might have been spoken about in your environment, so you have them before getting married. You might have the awareness. Some people don't, and that's also absolutely fine, right? Because it's not these are not conversations we openly have in society. These are not conversations awareness is created about. These are not conversations you might have at parties with people. Rather, the conversations you have at parties with people are something on a completely different tangent, right? So this space create having this conversation right now is also a gateway into creating that space, into creating that awareness, and which is happening slowly. There's so many support groups being run right now by different therapists that are premarital support groups that actually tell you what questions to ask your partner before getting married.
Ah, I wasn't aware of that. Okay.
And there's a lot of work being done in certain areas. It's still coming up in India, of course, but a lot of these support groups are happening, even for parents,
Hmm. Hmm.
caregivers with children who are neurodivergent,
Hmm.
caregivers
Hmm.
with
Hmm.
children who
Hmm.
have any other maybe chronic
Sure.
illnesses.
Yep.
All of these things, all of this work is being done. It's just your initiative as a parent to seek these spaces for yourself, because when you create a safe space for yourself, it of course very easy it is much easier to create that safe space and translate it into your child's life.
Hmm. Wonderful. I want to ask you one final question. It's sort of unrelated, but it just came to me because it's, I think, very relevant to our present discussion. Although the number of joint families is dwindling, we all know that, and we are all increasingly becoming nuclear, insular, etc., there's still a very, very large section of society, even if those families aren't in extended joint setups, there is at least cohabiting happening with, dadi, dada, that kind of setup.
Yeah.
Now, using myself as an example, my wife and I are absolutely scandalized routinely at some of the things that my mum says very casually and nonchalantly, which our greater fear being will then become part of our daughter's not just lexicon but belief system. Um, what can parents do to navigate this sort of situation where the fear or resultant behavior is not arising from them directly, but from an almost equally other significant family of member that lives with you?
Of course. Yeah. Again, very valid question. And this is a gray area that a lot of parents do have trouble navigating, right? And it's a lot of times I do have parents coming in and they're like, oh, we've controlled our phone usage with our child. We're trying to make them eat healthy. But our kid knows that, oh, they'll go to our grandparents and they can get away with whatever they want. And very common, very normal thing to be done. But again, in this situation also, um, a very underlying factor again comes in is a lack of communication. Why
Hmm.
is this happening in the first place? Because there's a lack of difference in belief system, which translate into a lack of communication, of course, right? And it is, of course, people have different views. They might not agree with yours. You might not agree with them. But again, coming to a consensus, coming to a midpoint, having that open space for a communicative household is something that will teach your child, again in a learning way, that okay, my parents have different views from their parents, I will have different views from my parents, but how do you come to a consensus? How do you resolve that conflict? And I do have two different views present in front of me. Which view aligns with me? We
Hmm.
can also create a self trust in the child in that moment, for the child to realize that okay, these are the views that I have in front of me. What might be better for me? At the beginning, when the child is younger, of course children just do as they're told, but as their cognitive abilities increase, as they learn to reason, question, and learn cause and effect, they also start questioning all the beliefs that they have that have been taught by their parents
Hmm.
as well. So a lot of times their beliefs, of course, delve into different directions from their parents also as they grow up, and that's a very natural part of the process. So instead of it being an area of conflict or an area of trouble, we can again easily make it an area of connection where
Hmm.
three different generations are living together with three different views, and we can create an open space to learn from each other, right? Because everybody had a different life, everybody exists in different realities.
Yeah.
There's no reality that's right or wrong. So, any conversations or any gray areas, if you notice in families, from a very slight change of tone, slight change of communication manner, a little respect and a little love can be turned into connection.
Thank you for clarifying that. It was a very selfish question, but I took the liberty of asking it because it applies to so many people.
Of course.
Is there anything specifically in terms of our theme for today's discussion that we haven't talked about, or perhaps you feel I haven't asked you that you'd like to add or clarify?
I think I'll just add one last point in terms of parenting. So, I think healthy parenting is also about creating a space for navigating risks rather than avoiding risks,
Hmm.
right? So
Can you
risk,
contextualize that, please?
yes, so risk taking is a very natural part of a person's growth. and done it in your life, your parents have done it in theirs, so will your kids in whatever aspect. It can be something as small as trying a new dish at a
Hmm.
restaurant
Hmm.
to something as big as taking a career change or a leap
Hmm.
in the
Hmm.
career change,
Hmm.
right? So instead of again creating a space of, oh, what will happen if I take this risk, we can create a space of, how about you go ahead and do it, and whatever the consequences may be, we can discuss them beforehand, see what our options are, and then take an informed decision. And
Hmm.
regardless of what happens, I will stand by you.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Right. So instead of avoiding risk,
Hmm.
which I think a lot of the previous generations did warn us about,
Correct.
right? We can now change, that is now changing in the world, if you see, to navigating risk.
Hmm.
So reading up more about that and creating our, kids awareness also around navigating risks rather than avoiding risks is something that can definitely be a healthy discussion that can happen in
I'm so glad you've brought that up because it's a very critical point, and I couldn't agree with you more based on my own experience. Because I think we've journeyed from a place where one heard this so much, right? Just simply ki, oh, ye mat karo, don't
Hmm.
even consider it. To now, I think what you're suggesting, in other words, communicates again to the child that the concept of taking a calculated risk and which is actually the best and the most logical solution and the way of becoming a risk taker, which is, not to become a gambler, but to
Yes.
do it slightly logically and scientifically.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So important. Yep. Great. It's been a really good discussion. Very, very insightful and helpful points. All I can hope and pray and wish is that people listen to this and develop the agency and realize the merits in undertaking a deeper inward investigation, creating a certain amount of awareness and then working and building on that and from that awareness.
Yes,
Thank you very
definitely.
much. All the best, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.